I will try to summarize a little bit some of the experiences that we had, like building communities around, let's say, makerspaces, and specifically about education in a way, or um, um, educational communities. And this is based on our experience. So I will not show you a kind of like amazing framework of how it works, because honestly, every time that we work with communities, it's really different. There's not one approach that you can use it and you can say, okay, uh, this always work. It will always work. But again, so yeah, we had been implementing, let's say, certain, let's say, considerations that I think so it will be nice. So we always start explaining them this idea of adopt, adapt, and apply. And this we use it for so many cases and so many, let's say, objectives. So in here, adopt, adapt, and apply, it's how basically someone is getting engaged, let's say, with the project or with some skills. So there's some phases in where you start, let's say, using technology, let's say, or incorporating technology in that case into your communities. Um, to make it, let's say, a little bit more evident. So when we adapting, let's say, certain, let's say, methodologies, technologies, what we are doing is basically applying, let's say, knowledge from outside, let's say, in our context in a way. But then as soon as we are starting integrating, let's say, as a community, this knowledge, so we are kind of appropriating from this knowledge, to be able, let's say, to start designing new opportunities based on this knowledge, this technology, or these communities. Okay, so and this is more or less, let's say, this kind of like evolution. Okay, um, but it's true that if you wanna, let's say, summarize it in some kind of like common sense steps, um, we explain it when we work with communities, that there's a kind of like easy path that we like also to refer, let's say, that is quite common sense. It doesn't have to be, let's say, follow it in this specific, let's say, order. But it's true that starting, let's say, with mapping, let's say, with kind of, let's say, resources, context, people, knowledge that you have around, let's say, to start building this community from the bottom up. Okay, so we always say, like, starting from, let's say, the co-creations aspect, let's say, of everything, co-all we call it, let's say, to then see what kind of potentials, let's say, challenges, trends, opportunities, this community can deal with. Okay, to define this strategy, prototype, interventions, classes, different, let's say, experiences to basically reflect and share. And this sharing, it's quite important to feel, let's say, kind of like uh, the ownership of what you are building. Okay, and now I will try to summarize some of the experiences that we had in the past. So this little device that you see here, it's similar as the ones that you probably will have to work on these days. So it's kind of like based on Arduino. It's a kind of like environmental sensor. We call it like smart citizen, and it brings us the opportunity to work, let's say, with so many communities in so many, let's say, topics and contexts. So we designed it, let's say, this device, and we put it in context in so many places. So in here, particularly, what you are seeing is a local community. It's in a neighborhood of Barcelona that she was trained, let's say, to use, let's say, this device to monitorize the sound pollution, let's say, into the specific location into Barcelona. And the idea was to build this community that you are seeing here represented with a lot of pictures. And what you see here, there's, let's say, technical people, neighborhood, people from school. So the idea was to start collecting, let's say, a kind of like a big, let's say, aspect of broader, let's say, aspect of this community, not just on a specific one, to be able to start, let's say, uh, working in possible solutions. So what you're seeing here is a kind of adaptation of the smart citizen. So that is the device, let's say, for visualizing, let's say, this problematic uh, that they had this community. Okay, in here you see the same, let's say, aspects that we was doing with this community with others. So trying to show, let's say, the data for the people to engage, and also into the schools, making, let's say, sense of these uh, noise levels and bring it, let's say, adaptation devices or tools or methodologies that makes people engage with the problem. And what you see here is one kind of applications of kids, let's say, in this school, like adopting, applying, let's say, this way of understanding, let's say, a problematic, measuring with a device, and then proposing solutions. So these are three solutions that they design it based on environmental problems and working with devices, let's say, to detect, let's say, that problems. And I don't gonna enter, let's say, in what these solutions was, but as a workflow, I think so it's clear. Another example was, and I think so we already talk about this project that is the Remix the School came out through a research project that we was working with a local community trying to bring a solution of leftovers of food. What you see here is us training teachers in the different steps of creating biomaterials, let's say, for them to start, let's say, adapting this into the schools with the kids to apply it, let's say, into the local curriculums. So this is what you are seeing here. We already talked about that, so I don't gonna go too much in detail with this, okay? And this is another example of how can we develop makerspace in a in the local not in Barcelona, in Catalonia area. So we were working, let's say, together with the educational department here in Catalonia, so to train, let's say, the schools and the global and the leaders that later on they will transfer, let's say, this approach into the schools. What you see here is the educational department leaders, let's say, being trained in some of the techniques of this kind of technology and how can we apply it into the school. And what you see here is when these leads are trained and then also the teachers, this is the result of the teachers, let's say, applying it into the school and then making a public fair where all different schools from Barcelona, Catalonia, they came here and they were explaining how they was involving technology, okay? And this, I just put it here because it makes me think in a kind of like a more global community. So what you see here is another, let's say, project that we did together with a school. The reference came from Exploratorium. I already put one example at the beginning of the class about they let's say projects. So we propose this school to work around the concept of light as a potential for explaining stories. Okay, so we take as from the Exploratorium this idea and we train teachers and fathers. Okay, so what you see here is a combination in the right part. We see a combination of both exploring, let's say, how what the kids they should do, okay, before to do anything. So they was adapting, let's say, the technology, okay, and then they figure out, let's say, how to bring it into the school, okay, or into the curriculum. So what you see here is a combination between, from one side, kids building their boxes, let's say, explaining stories. In that case, this was after the pandemic, so they were exploring feelings during the pandemic into turn it into stories, let's say, in boxes, let's say light boxes, okay. And what you see here, let's say into the right, it's the fathers, let's say, uh, the parents soldering LEDs for the kids to build their own boxes. And we apply it everything in a light festival in Barcelona as a main exposition. So we turn, let's say, a curriculum activity into a kind of like a art piece festival. And the nice thing is that during the evolution of the project, so we also, let's say, record student voices, so the feedback, everything, we turn it in a kind of interaction exposition. And what it happens after this project is that we had the opportunity to turn it into the global movement. And what you see here is we kind of partnership with Exploratorium people, and and we engage them into the, can we turn this idea of light and play with light, let's say, as a way to explain, let's say, feelings after the pandemic. So this was the, let's say, kind of challenge. We launched it through the X platform, okay, and this is what you see. um, and also, this was some of the materials that we did together with the community, the global community. So people that we didn't know since the beginning, and we basically agree in what kind of like educational material should be developed for the people to know what to do. So all of these diagrams that you see here were made by a community emerging, let's say, from the project.